breaking news tone is easy when the facts already sound unbelievable. Stockholm, ejected. A year-old Portuguese carpenter, Francisco Lazaro steps onto a marathon start line that will become a cautionary tale for more than a century. It is Centurar Zisha about Juscherhash in the shade, the air heavy and unmoving. Of Lusherbot starters, barely half will finish. One will not live to see the next morning. Lazaro, Portugal's flag bearer at his nation's Olympic debut, had greased his body with suet and wax to ward off sunburn and run lighter, a folk remedy that unknowingly sealed off his skin's ability to sweat his only radiator in the furnace of a long road race. At roughly the kilometer mark near Sollentuna, he begins to stagger, confused, then collapses. He is rushed to Stockholm's Seraphim Hospital. Doctors fight to bring down a core temperature reported over 37. He dies the next morning, July Sherwu, the first athlete to perish during a modern Olympic event. 23,000 people attend a memorial in the stadium. A monument later rises near the course turn. To this day, Stockholm's Senjobashar is remembered for heat, attrition, and a single irreversible mistake. Why did Lazaro fail? The science is simple, brutal, and universal. Block sweat, and you block evaporative cooling. In hot, humid conditions, even a small rise in core temperature compromises cognition and coordination. At marathon effort, that rise can be explosive. Contemporary accounts estimate Sanjarar Sesha in the shade. Even if exact microclimate readings vary, the combination of direct sun, asphalt, dust, and an afternoon start created a lethal wet bulb load. Stockholm's organizers, stung by the race's dangers, deployed doctors, water points, and a cleared watered road surface, progressive steps for Tenjobe Shirar. But that day's lesson was harder. Performance hacks cannot outvote biology. The line between toughing it out and organ failure is thin, especially when culture cheers the former and misunderstands the latter. There's another figure haunting that same race, Shizuo Kanakuri, the Japanese phenomenon whose qualifying world record over a 6 trial made him a sensation back home. He collapses from the heat, is nursed by a local family, and vanishes from official view, returning decades later in a televised coda to finish his marathon after 40 years. A footnote that underscores how punishing that day was. But Lazaro's death changes the narrative from romance to reform. In the years that follow, medical scrutiny and formalized hydration protocols become the norm. The first Olympic fatality becomes a starting point for modern sports medicine. Fast forward nearly a century. Whistler Sliding Center, Arten Shunen Arya Shirarni. Just hours before the Vancouver opening ceremony, Georgian luger Nodar Kumaritashvili is on his final training run, one of Arshalo he managed on what was widely called the fastest ice in the world. Luge is a sport of millimeters and reflex, and Whistler is unforgiving. In the critical late sequence, he exits curve Sherwool late, is high and drifting on Sherlow, and is ejected over the exit wall at roughly bike Sushasander lo kilometer maide. Bosher Joe Parasan crashin, striking an unpadded steel support pole. Medical staff respond immediately. He is pronounced dead at Whistler Healthcare Center. It is Luge's first athlete fatality since Tenjobek Sisherwo, and it detonates safety assumptions in a sport where speed had become a benchmark of prestige. The shock is global and the response immediate. The men's start is moved down to the women's start to reduce entry speed. The walls at turn Sherlow are raised and the ice profile adjusted. An investigation by the FIL and RCMP concludes the crash mechanics were athlete line error at extraordinary speed, not a single track defect. But to the watching world, causation feels less important than systems. If an error at Pike Sushaprudasa KM or Water H is unsurvivable, the system must prevent it. Speed is seductive television, loves it, venues market it, but engineering safety margins for human variability is the real duty of modern sport. In Whistler's case, mitigation replaced bravado, lower starts, higher walls, stricter homologation, and a public recognition that fastest ever is a hazardous KPI. If Vancouver was the televised shock, Albertville Tenjobai Jushirar was the quiet gut punch. Swiss speed skier Nicolas Bochatay, Archer Chi, died in a collision with a snow groomer on the morning of the speed skiing final at Les Arcs. It wasn't even on the high-velocity course. It was a warm-up run on regular alpine gear. Accounts differ on sirens and lights. What's not disputed? At alpine speeds even far below the Arbeit Kilometer Maiji of true speed ski mass versus machine is a mismatch. Bochatay's death, on the penultimate day of the Games, was the third Winter Olympic fatality on record, and a reminder that risk doesn't disappear when the cameras point elsewhere. The lesson here is operational. Venue and vehicle deconfliction must be absolute. Grooming windows, blind rollover protocols, radio control if one link fails, there must be others. To understand the through line from Lazaro to Kumaritashvili to Bochatay, step back from individual error and look at systems under pressure. The Olympics compress time and amplify incentives. To host, to dazzle, to be faster, grander, more global. Athletes chase the margins grease for sunburn. Lower starts to find rhythm. Early morning warm-ups to stay loose. Organizers chase spectacle faster ice, steeper lines, perfect snow. Pressure overwhelms intuition. A coating meant to protect becomes a heat trap. A late steering correction becomes a ballistic trajectory. A routine lap becomes a fatal blind crest. The solution set is similar across eras. Systematic risk audits, independent safety authorities, robust athlete voice, and a willingness to trade raw spectacle for controlled, repeatable, televisable excellence. There's also economics. Host cities pour billions into venues that must demonstrate world-class performance, often measured in extremes. In sliding sports, extreme equals speed. In endurance, extreme equals heat load and course difficulty. Yet the economics reverse when disaster strikes, reputations crater, legal liabilities rise, and reforms cost more than prevention ever would have. The difference between a ribbon cutting and a coroner's report is usually pre-event governance standards that anticipate outliers rather than explain them away. Consider the practical reforms seeded by these tragedies. After Chengdu-Baishirar, marathons and endurance events moved toward mandatory water stations, in-race medical observation, and culture-changing education around heat illness. Today's World Athletics guidance on hot weather competition cooling zones, ice towels, pre-cooling, abandonment thresholds owes a debt to those early painful lessons. After Artenshu, sliding tracks and international federations rebalanced their priorities. Homologation standards emphasize containment and speed management. Start heights can be adjusted down without shaming athletes, and protective infrastructure is designed for worst-case exit vectors, not idealized lines. And after Sevenjobai-Joshirar, mountain operations at major events adopted stricter lockout, water tag-out equivalents for grooming and transport during athlete movement, with special attention to blind knolls and radio discipline. These changes aren't glamorous. They don't fit in highlight reels, but they are the scaffolding that keeps sport human. The human part matters most. Lazaro was not an outlier in courage. He was an outlier in outcome. His death is not a parable about ignorance. It's about how easily tradition can collide with physiology under public pressure. Kumaritashvili's run is not a morality play about error. It's a reminder that margins must be designed for humans, not superhumans. Bochatay's morning lap is not an admonition against warming up. It's a systems engineering failure that treats a mountain like a closed loop when it's really a living network. In all three cases, the cost was a life. The currency of reform should not be that expensive. So, as we assemble this documentary record, the deadliest Olympic marathon, the fastest sliding track, the routine alpine morning that wasn't, we're not just revisiting tragedy for its own sake. We're mapping how the games learned, sometimes slowly, to institutionalize safety as a performance metric. If there's a single rule that ties Tenjo-Bashirar to Artenshu and Tenjo-Bak-Joshirar, it's this. The show only works if the system assumes that someone, on a bad day, will make a human mistake and lives anyway. Next, we confront two more turning points that forced the Olympic movement to grow up. The Tenju-Bai-Losha Rome road race that ignited the modern anti-doping regime. The Tenju-Bai-Losha Su Innsbruck downhill that reframed course protection. And the hard, unsung numbers from Athens, Archensi, and Rio, where the cost of speed and spectacle was paid by workers long before the flame was lit.